Economic Agency Paradox explained. AI, automation, and the collapse of demand. Here's the economic agency paradox that's reshaping our entire economic system. Companies desperately want to replace every human worker with AI and automation to maximize profits. But there's one massive problem they haven't solved. Who's going to buy their products when nobody has a job? This isn't some distant scenario. We're already seeing self-checkout machines eliminate cashier positions and AI chatbots replace customer service representatives. The transformation is accelerating faster than anyone expected. What happens when the very efficiency that makes businesses profitable also eliminates their customer base entirely? Understanding this paradox requires looking at four key economic players and the impossible trade-offs each one faces. But first, we need to understand something most people take for granted: what economic agency really means for human survival. Economic agency rests on labor rights, property rights, and voting rights, your three paths to earning, owning, and influencing policy. Real economic agency goes much deeper than your current bank balance. It's about having the actual power to shape your financial future and control your economic destiny. Without this power, you're just a passenger in an economy that could leave you behind at any moment. Let's break down how each pillar actually works in your life. Your labor rights aren't just about having a job. They include your ability to negotiate your salary, join a union if you want collective bargaining power, and switch employers when better opportunities arise. Think about teachers' unions fighting for better pay and smaller class sizes, or tech workers negotiating stock options and remote work arrangements. These negotiations happen because workers have recognized rights to organize and leverage their labor as a valuable resource. Labor rights, once centered on union power, essential for fair pay, but seen by some economists as market distorting, are now at risk as automation advances. Without these rights, you'd be completely at the mercy of whatever employers decide to offer. Property rights give you the second pathway to economic agency. This isn't just about owning your house, though that's certainly part of it. Property rights let you own stocks that pay dividends, invest in rental properties that generate monthly income, or even own intellectual property like patents or creative works that earn royalties. When you buy shares of Apple or Amazon, you're exercising property rights that give you a stake in those companies' future success. The wealthy understand this pillar extremely well, which is why they focus on building portfolios of income-generating assets rather than just earning wages. Your voting rights represent the third pillar, and they directly impact your economic situation more than most people realize. When you vote for candidates who support minimum wage increases, tax policies that benefit working families, or infrastructure spending that creates jobs, you're exercising economic agency through the political system. Local elections matter too. When your city council decides whether to approve a new shopping center or raise property taxes to fund schools, those decisions affect property values, job opportunities, and your cost of living. Your vote gives you a say in these economic policies. These three pillars work together to create a comprehensive system of economic participation. If you lose your job, you can use your property rights to live off investment income while you search for new work. If economic policies hurt your financial situation, you can vote for different leaders who will change those policies. If wages stagnate across your industry, you can organize with other workers to demand better compensation. The system provides multiple pathways to economic security and advancement. Here's what makes this system so powerful. It creates checks and balances that prevent any single force from completely dominating your economic fate. Employers can't just slash wages indefinitely because workers can organize and negotiate. Politicians can't ignore economic hardship because voters will replace them. Even if you don't own significant property today, you can work toward building wealth through assets over time. The three pillars support each other and create resilience in the face of economic challenges. But here's the problem we're facing right now. Automation and AI are about to completely eliminate the first pillar. When machines can perform most human jobs better, faster, and cheaper than people, your labor rights become meaningless. You can't negotiate with robots, and you can't strike against algorithms. The fundamental basis of the labor pillar disappears when human labor itself becomes obsolete. This isn't just about factory workers being replaced by machines. We're talking about AI systems that can write code, diagnose medical conditions, create legal documents, and handle customer service interactions. Even software engineers are watching AI agents write entire applications from simple prompts, threatening what many considered automation-proof careers. What happens when you lose one of these three pillars? The entire system becomes unstable. Imagine trying to balance on a three-legged stool when someone suddenly removes one of the legs. Without labor rights providing a pathway to economic participation, more people become dependent on the remaining two pillars. But property rights are already concentrated among a small percentage of the population, and voting rights alone can't provide the income people need to survive. The breakdown creates a cascading effect that threatens the whole social contract. When large numbers of people can't participate economically through work, they lose their stake in the system's success. Why would you support policies that benefit businesses if those businesses don't employ you? Why would you care about economic growth if you don't share in the benefits? The social contract that holds our economy together starts to fracture when too many people are excluded from economic participation. Most people don't realize how dependent they are on this three-pillar system because it's been so stable for so long. You wake up, go to work, earn a paycheck, maybe own some property, and vote in elections. The system feels natural and permanent, but it's actually a specific historical arrangement that emerged over centuries of social and economic evolution. The idea that everyone should have the right to work for wages, own property, and vote on economic policies wasn't always obvious or guaranteed. Understanding these fundamentals is crucial for grasping why our economy is heading toward crisis. The economic agency paradox emerges directly from the breakdown of this three-pillar system. Businesses want to automate away human labor to reduce costs and increase efficiency, but when they succeed in eliminating jobs, they also eliminate the primary way most people participate in the economy. As consumers, the very success of automation creates the conditions for economic collapse. This isn't a distant theoretical problem. We're already seeing early signs of this breakdown in industries where automation has advanced rapidly. Self-checkout machines reduce the need for cashiers. AI chatbots handle customer service inquiries that used to require human representatives. Algorithmic trading systems execute financial transactions without human intervention. Each of these developments makes economic sense for individual businesses, but collectively they're eroding the foundation of human economic participation. The transformation is happening faster than most people realize, and it's targeting the very foundation of how our economy has operated for generations. The wage-labor social contract is breaking down. At the heart of this disruption lies a fundamental shift in the social contract that has powered our economy for 2 centuries. For generations, we've operated on a simple deal. You show up to work, provide your labor and skills, and companies pay you wages in return. Everyone wins. Businesses get the human capital they need to operate and grow. Workers get income to support themselves and their families. This arrangement has been so fundamental to our economic system that we rarely question it. But what happens when one side of this deal suddenly becomes unnecessary? The wage-labor social contract seemed unbreakable because it created a perfect symbiotic relationship. Companies needed human workers to handle everything from manufacturing to customer service to financial analysis. Workers needed companies to provide steady employment and career advancement opportunities. This mutual dependence created stability and predictability for both sides. You could plan your life around a career path. Companies could build long-term strategies around their human workforce. The entire consumer economy developed around this foundation, with people earning wages and spending those wages on goods and services produced by other wage earners. But this breakdown isn't some future possibility we need to worry about. It's happening right now in ways that directly affect your daily life. When you call customer service and talk to a chatbot instead of a human representative, you're witnessing the wage-labor contract dissolving in real time. When you use self-checkout machines at the grocery store, you're participating in the elimination of cashier positions. When your bank's app handles transactions that used to require a teller, you're seeing automation replace human labor. These changes feel convenient and normal, but they represent the systematic removal of human workers from economic processes. The technology industry provides even more dramatic examples of this shift. AI coding assistants now write software code that previously required teams of programmers. These systems can generate functional applications, debug existing code, and even optimize performance without human intervention. Legal firms use AI to review contracts and conduct document discovery that used to employ dozens of paralegals and junior attorneys. Medical AI systems analyze X-rays and MRI scans with accuracy that matches or exceeds human radiologists. Each of these developments eliminates well-paying professional jobs that form the backbone of the middle class. What makes this disruption different from previous technological changes is the concept of labor substitution. Throughout history, new technologies typically created new types of jobs, even as they eliminated old ones. Modern combines replaced millions of farm labor hours, transforming agriculture from a labor-intensive industry, employing 80% of Americans, to today's highly mechanized sector, using less than 2% of the workforce. These transitions were often difficult for individual workers, but the overall economy continued to generate employment opportunities for human labor. Today's automation targets something fundamentally different: cognitive work itself. Previous technological disruptions mainly affected physical labor. Machines could lift heavier loads, work faster, and operate in dangerous conditions better than humans. But they still needed human intelligence to operate them, maintain them, and make decisions about how to use them. The current wave of AI and automation directly replaces human thinking, problem-solving, and decision-making. When machines can perform cognitive tasks better than humans, there's no obvious next level of work for people to move into. This shift becomes inevitable when you understand the better, faster, cheaper, safer framework that drives business decisions. As soon as a machine can outperform humans in all four categories, companies have no choice but to adopt automation. AI systems work 24 hours a day without breaks, vacation time, or sick leave. They don't require health insurance, retirement benefits, or office space. They don't make mistakes due to fatigue or emotional stress. They can be instantly updated with new information or capabilities. Most importantly, they get better and cheaper over time, while human labor costs continue to increase. The timeline for this transformation is much more compressed than most people realize. Software automation could reach 80–90% saturation in knowledge work by 2031–2033, following the typical 7–8 year SaaS adoption curve we've seen with other enterprise technologies. This means that within the next decade, most jobs that involve working with keyboards, videos, and mice will be largely automated. Companies that rely on these types of tasks will significantly reduce their human workforces. The speed of this change is accelerating because software agents are essentially pieces of code that can be copied and deployed instantly. Unlike physical robots that require manufacturing and installation, software automation can scale globally overnight. Why is this time different from previous technological disruptions? Modern AI systems are taking on human form and human capabilities in ways that previous machines never could. Chatbots engage in natural conversations that feel genuinely human. AI avatars can conduct video calls with realistic facial expressions and voice inflections. Robotic systems are developing human-like dexterity and mobility. This isn't just about machines performing specific tasks better than humans. It's about machines becoming functional substitutes for human workers across virtually every type of work environment. Competitive pressure. makes this automation inevitable, not optional. Individual business owners might prefer to keep human employees for ethical or personal reasons. But when their competitors gain significant cost advantages through automation, they face a stark choice: automate or go out of business. This dynamic played out in manufacturing over several decades as companies moved production to countries with lower labor costs. Now the same pressure is driving automation adoption across service industries, professional services, and creative fields. No industry is immune to this competitive dynamic. What makes this situation particularly challenging is that businesses are trapped in a contradiction they can't resolve through individual action. Every company wants to reduce labor costs through automation to stay competitive and maximize profits. But every company also needs customers with money to spend on their products and services. When businesses collectively eliminate human jobs, they collectively eliminate the purchasing power that drives consumer demand. This creates an impossible situation for the entire economic system. The wage-labor social contract worked because it created a virtuous cycle. Workers earned wages, spent those wages on goods and services, and generated revenue for businesses that could then hire more workers. Automation breaks this cycle by removing workers from the equation while expecting them to continue functioning as consumers. The result is a system that's incredibly efficient at producing goods and services, but has no mechanism for distributing the wealth that production creates. This fundamental contradiction creates impossible choices for everyone involved in the economy. The four economic players facing impossible choices. Let's examine how these contradictions play out through the four key economic players who drive our entire system: consumers, businesses, government, and banks. Each group is making perfectly rational decisions based on their individual interests, but when you add up all those rational choices, they create a completely irrational outcome for everyone involved. What makes this situation so dangerous is that nobody can solve it by acting alone, yet everyone's survival depends on finding a solution. Consumers represent the foundation of economic demand, and their situation reveals the scale of potential collapse. Roughly 48 million U.S. households drive aggregate demand through their purchasing decisions. These consumers need money to participate in the economy, and for most people, that money comes from jobs. You work, you get paid, you spend that money on groceries, housing, entertainment, and everything else that keeps the economy running. But what happens when those jobs start disappearing to automation? Consumers still need money to buy things, but the primary source of that money is being eliminated by the very companies that want to sell them products. Think about your own situation right now. Most of your spending money probably comes from your job, whether that's a salary, hourly wages, or freelance income. Even if you have some investment income or other sources of money, wages likely make up the biggest chunk of your purchasing power. Now imagine that AI and automation eliminate your job, and millions of others like it. You still need to buy food, pay rent, and handle all your other expenses. But where does that money come from? This isn't just a personal problem. It's a systemic issue that affects the entire consumer base that businesses depend on. Businesses face the other side of this impossible equation. They want to eliminate labor costs through automation because it makes perfect business sense. AI systems don't require salaries, health insurance, vacation time, or retirement benefits. They work around the clock without breaks and don't make error due to fatigue or personal problems. From a cost perspective, automation is almost always better than human labor once the technology becomes capable enough. But here's the catch. Businesses also need customers with money to spend on their products and services. When companies collectively eliminate human jobs, they collectively eliminate the purchasing power that drives their revenue. Consider a retail company implementing AI chatbots for customer service. The chatbots handle 80% of inquiries for a fraction of human costs, saving hundreds of thousands annually. But those fired workers were also customers who bought products from that company and many others. When they lose their jobs, they stop spending money, which reduces sales across the entire economy. The company's cost savings get wiped out by declining revenue, creating a feedback loop that undermines the very efficiency gains they sought. Government faces its own set of impossible trade-offs in this scenario. Governments need tax revenue to fund public services, infrastructure, and social programs. Most of that tax revenue comes from income taxes on working people and corporate taxes on profitable businesses. Governments also need social stability to maintain democratic legitimacy and prevent civil unrest. Both tax revenue and social stability depend heavily on having a population of employed citizens who feel they have a stake in the economic system. But automation threatens to eliminate both the jobs that generate tax revenue and the economic participation that creates social stability. What happens when unemployment rises from 4% to 20% due to automation? Government tax revenue drops dramatically because fewer people are earning taxable income. At the same time, demand for social services increases as more people need unemployment benefits, food assistance, and other support programs. The government faces a budget crisis right when it needs to spend more money to maintain social order. Politicians also face electoral pressure from voters who are economically displaced and angry about their situation. Economic conditions significantly influence voting behavior, particularly in the United States, which means political instability often follows economic disruption. Banks represent the fourth player in this economic drama, and they face threats from multiple directions. Banks need depositors who have money to put in accounts and borrowers who have income to repay loans. The entire banking system depends on a functioning economy where people earn money, save some of it, and borrow against their future earning capacity. When automation eliminates jobs, it threatens both sides of the banking equation. People without jobs can't maintain savings accounts or qualify for loans. They also can't make payments on existing mortgages, car loans, and credit cards. The 2008 Great Recession provides a clear example of how banks suffer when unemployment spikes. When unemployment reached about 10%, banks faced waves of foreclosures, loan defaults, and business failures that threatened the entire financial system. Now imagine a scenario where automation pushes unemployment to 25% or 30%. Banks would face a complete breakdown of their business model as customers lose the ability to transact and service their debts. The banking system that serves as the infrastructure for all economic activity would become unstable at exactly the moment when society needs it most. Here's what makes this situation so frustrating. Each player's rational self-interest creates collective irrationality. Businesses automate to stay competitive and reduce costs. Consumers try to save money by using automated services like self-checkout and online ordering. Government tries to balance budgets and avoid market intervention. Banks try to minimize risk and maximize returns. Every individual decision makes sense, but the combined effect is economic suicide for everyone involved. Everyone wants the economy to keep growing and generating wealth. Businesses want more customers and higher profits. Consumers want better products and services at lower prices. Government wants a strong tax base and stable society. Banks want a healthy economy with lots of borrowers and depositors, but their individual actions undermine that shared goal. It's like a traffic jam, where every driver makes rational decisions about which lane to choose, but the collective result is that nobody gets where they want to go. This isn't a coordination problem that can be solved with better communication or cooperation. Even if all four players understood the situation perfectly and wanted to work together, they'd still face the fundamental contradiction between automation's efficiency gains and the need for human economic participation. A business executive might personally oppose automation, but if their competitors gain cost advantages through AI, they have no choice but to automate or go bankrupt. A bank president might want to support full employment, but they can't make loans to people without income. The competing incentives create the core of the economic agency paradox. The same technological advances that make production more efficient also destroy the mechanisms that allow people to benefit from that efficiency. We're creating a system that can produce abundance, but has no way to distribute it to the people who need it. What happens when this contradiction reaches its logical conclusion? When machines produce everything but nobody can buy anything. This breakdown creates what economists call an economic death spiral, where declining wages trigger reduced consumer spending, leading to business failures and further job losses in an accelerating cycle. Picture a world where factories run themselves, AI systems handle all customer service, robots perform surgery, and algorithms manage every aspect of business operations. Production efficiency reaches near perfection. Quality control eliminates defects. Costs drop to almost nothing. Supply chains optimize themselves in real time. This sounds like an economic paradise, right? But there's one massive problem with this picture. If machines produce everything, who has the money to buy anything? This scenario represents the ultimate endpoint of our current automation trajectory, and it reveals a fundamental flaw in how we think about economic progress. To understand why this matters, we need to examine aggregate demand, which is simply the total amount of money consumers spend in the economy. Think of aggregate demand as the engine that drives everything else. When people spend money on groceries, housing, entertainment, and services, that spending creates revenue for businesses. Those businesses then invest in new products, hire workers, and expand operations. The cycle continues as those workers spend their paychecks, creating more demand. Without sufficient aggregate demand, the entire economic system breaks down regardless of how efficiently we can produce goods and services. Right now, aggregate demand in the United States breaks down into three main components. Roughly 60% comes from wages, 20% from property income like dividends and rent, and 19% from government transfers such as Social Security and unemployment benefits. This distribution has remained relatively stable for decades and forms the foundation of our consumer economy. When you get your paycheck and spend it on rent, food, and other necessities, you're contributing to that 60% wage component. When retirees receive dividend payments from their investments and spend that money, they're adding to the 20% property component. When people use unemployment benefits or disability payments to cover expenses, they're participating in the government transfer component. What happens when the 60% wage component starts shrinking rapidly due to automation? The math becomes terrifying pretty quickly. If automation eliminates just half of all jobs over the next decade, the wage component of aggregate demand could drop from 60% to 30% or lower. That represents a massive reduction in total consumer spending power. Even if property income and government transfers increased somewhat to compensate, they couldn't possibly make up for such a dramatic loss of wage-based purchasing power. The result would be a severe contraction in overall economic activity that would affect everyone, including the businesses that implemented automation to save money. During the Great Depression, unemployment peaked between 25% and 28%, creating catastrophic economic devastation that lasted over a decade. Now consider that AI and automation could potentially push unemployment to 30% or 40%, far beyond any historical precedent we've experienced. We're talking about unemployment rates that would make the Great Depression look manageable. By comparison, unlike previous economic downturns that were caused by financial crises or external shocks, this unemployment would be permanent and structural. The jobs wouldn't come back when the economy recovered, because machines would continue performing those jobs better and cheaper than humans. This creates a completely different type of economic challenge that our existing institutions and policies aren't designed to handle. The resulting death spiral becomes almost inevitable once it starts. Fewer jobs means less consumer spending, which means lower business revenues and more business failures. Those business failures eliminate even more jobs, which reduces spending further. The cycle accelerates as each round of job losses creates additional economic damage. Banks stop lending because fewer people qualify for loans. Landlords face waves of tenant defaults. Local governments lose tax revenue just when they need to spend more on social services. The interconnected nature of modern economies means that problems in one sector quickly spread to others. This death spiral also devastates innovation and investment, which are crucial for long-term economic growth. Why would companies invest in research and development for new products if consumers can't afford to buy them? Why would entrepreneurs start new businesses if there's no customer base with purchasing power? Why would investors fund startups if the market for goods and services is shrinking? Innovation requires not just the ability to create new things, but also a market of people who can pay for those innovations. When automation eliminates the jobs that provide purchasing power, it also eliminates the economic incentive for continued innovation and progress. Even partial automation that creates 20 to 30% unemployment would be economically devastating. Remember that during the 2008 recession, unemployment peaked at about 10%, and that caused a global financial crisis that required massive government intervention to prevent complete economic collapse. Double or triple that unemployment rate, and you're looking at economic damage that could permanently alter society. The timing of this crisis makes it particularly dangerous because we're already seeing early signs of this breakdown in action. Self-checkout machines reduce demand for cashiers. AI chatbots handle customer service calls that used to employ human workers. Algorithmic trading systems execute financial transactions without human involvement. Online shopping platforms use automated recommendation engines instead of human sales staff. Each of these changes seems small and beneficial in isolation, but collectively, they're removing human workers from economic processes while expecting those same humans to continue functioning as consumers. Companies are trapped in this contradiction. Whether they realize it or not, they automate to stay competitive and reduce costs. But their success in eliminating human jobs undermines the consumer base they depend on for revenue. It's like a farmer who eats his seed corn during a difficult winter. The short-term survival strategy destroys the foundation for future growth. What makes this situation so urgent is that we're not talking about a gradual transition that will unfold over several generations. The current wave of AI and automation is advancing much faster than previous technological changes. Software can be deployed globally, almost instantly, unlike physical machines that require manufacturing and installation. Once an AI system proves effective at a particular task, it can replace human workers across entire industries within months or years, rather than decades. We're essentially trying to manage an economic transformation that historically took centuries, but we're doing it in real time with no clear plan for maintaining purchasing power as human labor becomes obsolete. The consequences of this economic disruption extend far beyond individual financial hardship and threaten the very foundations of social stability. Why this threatens democracy and social order? Economic disruption and political chaos go hand in hand throughout human history. When people lose their economic footing, they don't just quietly accept their fate. They get angry, they organize, and they often tear down the existing political system in search of something better. The French Revolution began with bread shortages and economic inequality, while the Russian Revolution started with workers who couldn't feed their families. As the research shows, low economic agency directly correlates with civil unrest and revolution. What we're facing with mass automation isn't just an economic challenge, it's a direct threat to democratic stability and social order. Economic agency directly connects to democratic participation in ways most people never consider. When you have a job, property, and voting rights, you feel invested in the system's success. You want policies that protect your employment, increase your property values, and create opportunities for advancement. This investment makes you a stakeholder who supports democratic institutions because they serve your interests. But what happens when automation eliminates your job and reduces your economic agency? You lose that stake in the system's success. Why would you support policies that benefit businesses if those businesses don't employ you? Why would you care about economic growth if you don't share in the benefits? The concept that researchers call kitchen table economics explains how powerfully economic conditions influence voting behavior. People make political decisions based on their personal financial situation. When families struggle to pay bills or lose their jobs, they vote for change, regardless of which political party offers it. This isn't about ideology or policy details. It's about survival and hope for a better future. Economic hardship makes people willing to support radical political movements that promise solutions, even when those movements threaten democratic norms and institutions. Consider how the 2008 financial crisis reshaped American politics. Unemployment reached about 10%, and millions of people lost their homes to foreclosure. The resulting political anger fueled both the Tea Party movement and Occupy Wall Street protests. People across the political spectrum demanded fundamental changes to the economic system. Traditional political parties struggled to respond to this anger because their standard policy solutions weren't adequate for the scale of economic disruption people experienced. Now imagine that same dynamic playing out with unemployment rates of 30% instead of 10%. Mass unemployment undermines democratic legitimacy in several specific ways. First, unemployed people have more time to participate in political protests and movements, but they also have less faith in existing institutions. Second, economic inequality creates resentment between those who benefit from automation and those who lose their jobs. Third, government loses tax revenue from unemployed workers while facing increased demands for social services, creating budget crises that make effective governance more difficult. Fourth, political candidates can gain support by blaming democratic institutions for economic problems and promising authoritarian solutions. A social contract breakdown becomes particularly dangerous when large numbers of people simultaneously lose their economic stake in society. Throughout history, stable societies have maintained social order by ensuring that most citizens have some pathway to economic advancement. This doesn't mean everyone needs to be wealthy, but they need realistic hope that their situation can improve through legal means. When automation eliminates jobs faster than new opportunities emerge, it breaks this fundamental promise of social mobility that underlies democratic capitalism. Think about the American dream concept that has motivated political support for generations. The idea that anyone can work hard and build a better life for themselves and their families has been central to American political culture. This dream depends on the availability of jobs that provide decent wages and opportunities for advancement. When automation eliminates those jobs without replacing them with equivalent opportunities, it destroys the foundation of the social contract that has maintained political stability for centuries. More recent examples show how technological disruption without adequate economic solutions creates social unrest. The Industrial Revolution displaced millions of agricultural workers and craftsmen throughout the 19th century. This displacement led to labor riots, political movements like Luddism that literally attacked machinery, and the rise of socialist and communist movements that challenged the entire capitalist system. The difference between then and now is that the current wave of automation is happening much faster and affecting a broader range of occupations simultaneously. What makes our current situation particularly dangerous is that we're not just talking about economic problems. We're facing the potential collapse of the entire framework that has supported democratic society for generations. Democratic institutions depend on having a large middle class with economic stability and social mobility. When automation eliminates middle-class jobs faster than it creates new opportunities, it erodes the social base that supports democratic governance. People who lose their economic agency become more susceptible to authoritarian movements that promise simple solutions to complex problems. The timing of this crisis makes it especially urgent because democratic institutions are already under stress from other factors. Political polarization has increased dramatically in recent years. Trust in government and traditional institutions has declined. Social media has created information environments that can rapidly spread political anger and organize opposition movements. Adding mass unemployment to this volatile mix could trigger political instability that fundamentally alters democratic society. Modern polarization amplifies these risks because economic grievances can quickly become political weapons that tear apart the social fabric. This isn't just about economics anymore. It's about whether democratic civilization can survive the transition to an automated economy. The solutions we implement over the next decade will determine whether we maintain stable democratic institutions or face political chaos that could last for generations. History shows us that economic disruption of this magnitude doesn't resolve itself peacefully without deliberate intervention. But even if we recognize the political dangers of mass unemployment, we still face a more fundamental question about how society should function when machines can produce everything we need. The distribution problem. Who gets what when machines do everything? The challenge now shifts from preventing political chaos to solving an even more fundamental puzzle. How do we distribute wealth when the traditional mechanisms for doing so completely disappear? Here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody wants to acknowledge. We're about to create a world of incredible abundance that we have no idea how to share. Imagine factories that run themselves, producing goods at near zero cost. Picture AI systems managing every aspect of business operations with perfect efficiency. Think about robotic farms that grow food without human intervention. Will have the production capacity to meet everyone's needs and wants. But here's the problem that keeps economists awake at night. When machines do all the work, how do we decide who gets what? Our entire economic system is built around the idea that you have to work to earn money to buy things. What happens when work disappears, but the need for money doesn't? For the past few centuries, markets have appeared to solve this distribution problem through what many economists reference as the invisible hand of self-interest. Though this concept is often misunderstood. You want things, so you get a job to earn money to buy those things. Companies need workers, so they offer wages to attract people with the skills they need. This creates a distribution mechanism where wealth flows to people based on the value of their labor and their ability to find work. The system isn't perfect, but it creates a rough connection between contribution and reward. People who work harder, develop valuable skills, or take entrepreneurial risks generally earn more money and can buy more things. This wage-based distribution has been so fundamental to our economy that we rarely question whether it's the only way to organize society. But automation breaks this entire mechanism by eliminating labor scarcity. Right now, human workers are a limited resource. There are only so many hours in a day, only so many people available to work, and only so many skills each person can develop. This scarcity gives workers bargaining power and creates competition among employers for the best talent. When companies need to hire people, they have to offer attractive wages and benefits to compete for available workers. This competition drives up wages and ensures that most people have some access to purchasing power through employment. What happens when machines can perform most jobs better, faster, and cheaper than humans? Labor scarcity disappears completely. Companies don't need to compete for human workers because they can use AI systems and robots instead. The fundamental basis of wage distribution breaks down because there's no longer a market for human labor. We'll have plenty of production capacity to create goods and services, but no mechanism to distribute the wealth that production generates. It's like having a fully stocked grocery store with no way to decide who gets to take food home. Remember that our current aggregate demand relies on that 60% wage component, 20% property income, and 19% government transfers. When automation eliminates the wage component that forms the majority of purchasing power, how do we replace that distribution mechanism? Traditional market mechanisms fail completely when human labor becomes irrelevant. Markets work by matching supply and demand through price signals. When something is scarce, prices go up, which encourages more production and reduces consumption until supply and demand balance out. But this system depends on people having money to express their preferences through purchasing decisions. When automation eliminates jobs, It also eliminates the wages that allow people to participate in markets. You might desperately need food, clothing, and shelter, but if you don't have money, the market treats you as if you don't exist. Our current distribution system relies entirely on the principle that you must contribute something valuable to receive purchasing power in return. This principle seems fair and natural because it connects personal effort with personal reward. If you work hard, develop useful skills, and contribute to society, you earn money that lets you buy things and improve your life. If you choose not to work or can't find employment, you receive limited support through government programs, but you don't get full access to what the economy produces. This contribution-based distribution has been the foundation of capitalist economies for centuries. Automation completely breaks this principle by separating contribution from consumption. Machines contribute enormous value by producing goods and services more efficiently than humans ever could. But machines don't consume anything except electricity and maintenance. They don't buy houses, food, entertainment, or any of the products they help create. The value they contribute doesn't flow back into the economy through their spending, because they don't spend money. Meanwhile, the humans who used to contribute through their labor now have no way to earn money to consume what the machines produce. We end up with incredible productive capacity, but no purchasing power distributed to the people who need it. This reveals that distribution is fundamentally a political and social problem, not just an economic one. Economics can tell us how to produce things efficiently, but it can't tell us who deserves access to what we produce. Should everyone get equal access to what automated systems produce? Should distribution be based on past contributions, current need, or some other criteria? These aren't technical questions that markets can solve automatically. They're choices that societies have to make through political processes. When automation eliminates the wage system, we're forced to confront these distribution questions directly. We can no longer pretend that markets automatically solve the problem of who gets what. Instead, we have to make explicit decisions about how to share the wealth that automated systems produce. This requires new institutions, new policies, and new social agreements about economic rights and responsibilities. The transition from wage-based distribution to something else will be fundamentally political because it involves changing the basic rules of how our economy operates. What makes this challenge so urgent is that we need to create these new distribution mechanisms before automation eliminates enough jobs to cause economic collapse. We can't wait until unemployment reaches 30% or 40% to figure out how to maintain purchasing power. By that point, the economic and social disruption would be so severe that rational policymaking might become impossible. We need to start building alternative distribution systems now, while we still have time to experiment and adjust our approach based on what works. The solutions we develop will determine whether automation creates widespread prosperity or widespread suffering. We have the technological capability to produce abundance for everyone. The question is whether we can develop the political and social institutions to distribute that abundance fairly. This isn't just about economics anymore. It's about designing the foundation for a completely different type of society. But what specific solutions are people actually proposing to solve this distribution crisis? Why universal basic income isn't enough? Universal basic income has become the go-to solution that everyone talks about when discussing automation and job displacement. Politicians mention it in speeches. Tech billionaires fund pilot programs. Economists write papers about its potential benefits. UBI seems like the obvious answer to our automation challenges because it directly addresses the core problem. People need money to survive, and automation eliminates the jobs that traditionally provide that money. Give everyone a monthly check from the government, and you solve the purchasing power crisis while maintaining social stability. But here's what most UBI advocates don't want to admit. It's not nearly enough to solve the economic agency paradox on its own. UBI faces 4 major structural problems that make it incomplete as a standalone solution to our economic transformation. These aren't minor implementation details that can be worked out later. They're fundamental challenges that could undermine the entire approach if we rely too heavily on government payments as our primary response to automation. Understanding these limitations doesn't mean UBI is worthless, but it does mean we need more comprehensive solutions that address the deeper issues of economic participation and wealth distribution. The first major problem is central control, which puts all our economic eggs in the government basket and creates dangerous dependency relationships. When you depend on government checks for your basic survival, you lose economic freedom and become vulnerable to political manipulation. What happens if your UBI payments get cut off due to a bureaucratic error or system malfunction? What happens if politicians decide to reduce payments during budget crises? What happens if the government uses UBI as a tool to control behavior by threatening to withhold payments from people who don't comply with certain requirements? Think about the problems people already face with existing government programs. Social Security recipients sometimes have their checks delayed or suspended due to administrative errors. Unemployment insurance claims get held up for months during high-demand periods. Now imagine that your entire livelihood depends on a similar government-administered system. The bureaucracy that manages UBI would have enormous power over people's daily lives, and government agencies aren't exactly known for their efficiency or responsiveness to individual problems. The second major issue involves market distortions that occur when you give everyone the same amount, regardless of their location or circumstances. As the research shows, a monthly UBI payment of $2,000 means completely different things depending on where you live. That amount might cover basic expenses in rural Wyoming, but it wouldn't even pay rent for a small apartment in New York City or San Francisco. This creates artificial incentives for people to move to areas where their UBI payments have more purchasing power, which could lead to massive population shifts that overwhelm infrastructure in low-cost areas, while creating ghost towns in expensive cities. These geographic disparities also undermine the price signals that help markets function efficiently. When people can live anywhere and receive the same government payment, it breaks the connection between local economic productivity and local population levels. Areas with high costs of living typically have those costs because they're economically productive places where many people want to live and work. If UBI allows people to live comfortably in low-cost areas without working, it could reduce the labor supply in productive regions while creating unsustainable population growth in areas that lack economic opportunities. Inflation represents the third major risk with UBI implementation. When you inject large amounts of money into the economy without corresponding increases in production, you typically see prices rise as more money chases the same amount of goods and services. The pandemic stimulus checks provide a clear example of how government payments can contribute to inflation. While economists debate how much the stimulus payments contributed to recent price increases, most agree they played some role in driving up costs across the economy. UBI could create similar inflationary pressures, especially if the payments are large enough to meaningfully impact consumer spending. If everyone receives an extra $1,000 or $2,000 per month, businesses might simply raise their prices to capture some of that additional purchasing power. Landlords could increase rents, knowing that tenants have guaranteed government income. Grocery stores could raise food prices. The result could be that UBI payments get eaten up by inflation, leaving recipients no better off than before while creating economic inefficiency throughout the system. The fourth concern involves tax flight, where the high taxation needed to fund UBI could drive wealth and talent to other jurisdictions with lower tax burdens. UBI programs require substantial government revenue, which means significantly higher taxes on businesses and wealthy individuals. As tax rates increase, people become more motivated to find ways to reduce their tax obligations. They might move to states or countries with lower taxes. They might restructure their finances to minimize taxable income. They might lobby for special exemptions or loopholes. This creates a potentially destructive cycle, where the people most capable of funding UBI have the strongest incentives to avoid those taxes. High earners and successful businesses could relocate to places that don't impose UBI taxes, leaving behind a smaller tax base to fund the same level of benefits. The remaining taxpayers would face even higher rates to make up the difference, which could trigger additional rounds of tax flight until the entire system becomes unsustainable. UBI experiments at city, state, and federal levels have shown both successes and limitations that illustrate these broader concerns. Small-scale pilot programs often produce positive results because they don't face the systemic challenges that would emerge with full implementation. When a few hundred people receive UBI payments in a limited geographic area for a short time period, you don't see the inflation, migration, or tax flight effects that could occur with permanent universal programs. What makes UBI necessary but not sufficient is that it provides a floor rather than a complete solution to economic participation. UBI can prevent people from falling into absolute poverty. When automation eliminates their jobs, it can provide basic income security that allows people to take risks, pursue education, or care for family members. It can maintain minimal purchasing power that keeps consumer spending from collapsing entirely. These are important benefits that justify including UBI as part of our response to automation. But UBI doesn't restore economic agency or give people meaningful control over their financial futures. Recipients remain dependent on government decisions about payment levels and program continuation. They don't build wealth or develop ownership stakes in the automated economy that displaces them. They don't gain the political and economic power that comes from owning productive assets. UBI provides survival, but it doesn't provide the economic participation that people need to thrive in an automated world. This analysis reveals why we need to think beyond just redistributing money and start considering how to redistribute ownership itself. Banks and counties. The new economic infrastructure. Your relationship with banks and local government is about to replace your relationship with employers as the primary economic connection in your life. This might sound strange right now, but think about it from a practical perspective. Your employer currently handles your paycheck, benefits, retirement contributions, and health insurance. But what happens when that employer replaces you with an AI system? Someone else needs to manage your economic well-being, and banks are perfectly positioned to fill that role. Banks possess all the essential capabilities needed to manage complex ownership portfolios in an automated economy. They already handle identity verification through established KYC expertise, which is crucial for security and compliance. This represents a significant advantage over emerging technologies like blockchain that haven't fully solved these identity management challenges yet. Banks maintain sophisticated systems for tracking diverse investment accounts, managing dividend payments, and processing rebates from various sources. They connect with all payment rails, including FedNow and RTP systems, making them natural command centers for economic well-being. Their user-friendly interfaces through local branches and mobile apps can simplify complex economic paradigms for customers who don't want to become financial experts. What makes this transition particularly interesting is how banks could compete for customers by offering better ownership opportunities and dividend management services. Instead of competing primarily on loan rates and checking account fees, banks would differentiate themselves based on the ownership stakes and investment returns they can provide to customers. A bank might partner with local solar cooperatives, data centers, or infrastructure projects to offer exclusive ownership opportunities to their customers. They could develop sophisticated algorithms for managing diverse ownership portfolios, automatically reinvesting dividends and rebalancing investments based on individual preferences and risk tolerance. This voluntary association creates market-driven solutions rather than government mandates. Local institutions have particularly strong incentives to adopt these post-labor economic models because their success directly ties to the financial success of their customers and deeper community investment. A community bank that helps local residents build wealth through ownership stakes also strengthens its own customer base and deposit levels. When people in the community prosper through property income, they have more money to save and invest through local financial institutions. This creates a mutually beneficial relationship where banks genuinely want their customers to succeed financially rather than just borrowing money and paying interest on loans. Counties represent the ideal scale for implementing and testing these ownership-based economic initiatives due to two key operational advantages. First, they directly control valuable revenue-generating assets that could fund community wealth building without requiring new taxation or federal funding. They own land that could host solar farms or wind installations. They control utility franchises that generate ongoing revenue streams. They manage infrastructure easements that have value for telecommunications and energy companies. They possess zoning authority that affects property values and development opportunities. These existing assets could generate investment returns that get distributed to residents through community endowment funds, creating local wealth without depending on outside resources or government transfer. Second, counties are small enough to avoid the gridlock that often paralyzes state and federal governments, yet large enough to generate meaningful economic data and serve as scalable models for broader adoption. A county can move quickly to pilot new programs, adjust them based on results, and demonstrate their effectiveness to other jurisdictions. This flexibility allows for experimentation and innovation that would be difficult to achieve at larger governmental scales, where bureaucracy and political complexity slow down decision-making processes. The existing infrastructure that counties already maintain makes implementation much more practical than creating entirely new systems. Counties manage property records that could track ownership stakes. They operate tax assessment systems that could handle dividend distribution. They maintain residency verification processes that could determine eligibility for local ownership programs. They have established procedures for disbursing payments to residents. This existing administrative capacity means counties can build ownership programs using systems they already operate, rather than starting from scratch with new bureaucracies and technologies. Political diversity across different counties allows for cross-partisan validation of post-labor economic models. While revealing region-specific opportunities, conservative rural counties might focus on timber royalties, mineral rights, or agricultural cooperatives. Liberal urban counties might emphasize solar cooperatives, carbon sequestration projects, or technology infrastructure. Moderate suburban counties might pursue mixed approaches that combine different ownership strategies. This diversity creates natural experiments that can demonstrate which approaches work best in different economic and political environments, building broader support for ownership-based solutions across political divides. Local governance creates accountability and trust that federal programs simply cannot match. County officials live alongside the constituents affected by their decisions. They shop at the same stores, send their children to the same schools, and face their neighbors regularly in social situations. This proximity creates natural accountability mechanisms that don't exist with distant federal bureaucracies. When a county commissioner makes decisions about community ownership funds, residents can approach them directly at town halls, grocery stores, or community events. This personal connection builds trust and ensures that programs serve actual community needs, rather than abstract policy goals. This approach creates a decentralized, market-based solution, rather than centralized government control of economic distribution. Each county can develop ownership strategies that match their local resources and community preferences. Banks compete to offer the best ownership opportunities and management services. Residents choose which programs to participate in and which banks to work with based on their individual circumstances and goals. The result is a network of locally controlled ownership initiatives that adapt to different regional conditions while maintaining individual choice and market competition. Voluntary adoption through competitive banking creates better outcomes than government mandates because it aligns incentives properly. Banks succeed when their customers build wealth through ownership stakes. Counties prosper when their residents have more income and investment capital. Individuals benefit from having multiple options for building property income, rather than depending solely on government transfers. This voluntary system preserves individual choice while creating collective economic power that benefits entire communities. Consider asking your local bank about new dividend services or ownership opportunities they might be developing. The infrastructure for this transformation already exists in communities across the country. Counties operate administrative systems, banks manage investment portfolios, and various ownership models function successfully in different contexts. The pieces just need to be connected and scaled to meet the challenges of an automated economy. But the window for building these systems before widespread disruption begins is narrower than most people realize. The property revolution, turning everyone into owners. Here's a radical idea that could solve the economic agency paradox. Instead of trying to save the wage-based economy, we completely transform it into an ownership-based economy. What if everyone became an owner of the automated systems that are replacing human workers? Instead of fighting against machines taking our jobs, we could own those machines and profit from their productivity. This isn't some far-fetched fantasy. The building blocks for this transformation already exist, and some places are already implementing pieces of this vision. The target is ambitious but achievable. Shift our economic foundation from 60% wages, 20% property income, and 20% government transfer. This ownership revolution would fundamentally change how wealth flows through society. Instead of most people depending on paychecks from employers, most people would receive dividend payments from their ownership stakes in automated businesses, infrastructure, and resources. You'd still have some traditional employment, but it would become a smaller part of most people's income. Property ownership would expand far beyond just owning your house or some stocks. Everyone would own pieces of the solar farms powering the grid, the data centers running AI systems, the automated factories producing goods, and the infrastructure that makes modern life possible. The models for this transformation already exist and work in practice. Alaska has operated the permanent fund for decades, giving every state resident annual dividend payments from oil revenues. Norway built a massive sovereign wealth fund that exceeds $1 trillion and returns profits to Norwegian citizens. These funds are based on citizenship and residency, making them accessible to a wide range of individuals. Both programs demonstrate that broad-based ownership can work at scale without creating economic chaos or political instability. Employee stock ownership plans provide another proven model that could expand dramatically in an automated economy. Many companies already offer these programs, allowing workers to receive company shares as part of their compensation package. At Cisco, employees could allocate 20% of their salary into discounted company shares, providing an immediate 20% income boost while building long-term wealth. These programs let workers build ownership stakes that generated significant wealth over time. The key insight is that this model could expand beyond traditional employees to include customers, community members, and anyone affected by automated production. Customer equity programs represent one of the most exciting possibilities for broad ownership distribution. Imagine receiving fractional shares every time you shop at a store or use a service. These programs would function similarly to kickback or reward systems, where a percentage of each purchase translates into fractional shares in the company. Instead of just getting points or cash back, you'd become a part owner of the businesses you support. Over time, these ownership stakes would generate dividend payments that supplement your other income sources. The more you shop at a particular store, the larger your ownership stake becomes, creating genuine incentives for customer loyalty while building wealth for consumers. What makes this transformation particularly promising is that the two most potent interventions, sovereign wealth funds and community trusts, already exist and work today. Alaska's permanent fund has operated successfully for over 4 decades. Norway's sovereign wealth fund has grown to over $1 trillion, while providing benefits to Norwegian citizens. These models prove that broad-based ownership can generate substantial returns while maintaining political stability and economic growth. We'll explore additional cooperative models and ownership mechanisms in future discussions. But these two approaches provide the foundation for transforming our economic system. This creates a virtuous cycle where increased ownership leads to more investment returns, which provide capital for additional ownership opportunities. Unlike wage income that stops when you stop working, ownership income continues as long as the underlying assets remain productive. Property ownership creates compound growth as dividends get reinvested into additional ownership stakes. Someone who starts with small ownership positions in their 20s could build substantial wealth over decades through this compounding effect, even without traditional employment income. Companies could facilitate this transition by allocating a portion of their corporate tax obligations towards the issuance of shares to wealth funds, particularly non-voting, dividend-generating shares. This approach would spread ownership more broadly without disrupting corporate governance or operational control. Businesses would maintain their ability to make strategic decisions while sharing the financial benefits of automation with the broader community. This creates alignment between corporate success and community prosperity rather than the current system where automation benefits shareholders while harming workers. The cooperative approach works particularly well for infrastructure and resource management, because these sectors benefit from stable long-term ownership rather than speculative trading. A community-owned solar farm doesn't need to maximize quarterly profits or respond to stock market volatility. It can focus on reliable energy production and steady returns to member owners over decades. This stability makes cooperatives ideal for essential services and infrastructure that support automated production systems. This ownership revolution addresses the core problem of the economic agency paradox. By giving people direct stakes in automated production, rather than trying to preserve jobs that machines can perform better. Instead of fighting against technological progress, we align human interests with automation success. When robots and AI systems become more productive, ownership stakes become more valuable. When automation reduces costs, profit margins increase and generate higher dividends for owners. This creates a future where everyone benefits from technological advancement rather than being displaced by it. But implementing this ownership transformation requires new institutions and relationships that can manage complex portfolios of assets while maintaining local accountability and democratic control. The infrastructure for this change already exists in unexpected places, waiting to be reimagined for our automated future. The point of no return, why we must act now. The critical factor determining our success lies in understanding exactly how fast this transformation will unfold and acting accordingly. We're standing at a technological tipping point that's moving faster than most people realize. Software as a service technologies typically span 7 to 8 years from initial introduction to achieving 80–90% saturation across industries. Right now, we're in year 1 of widespread AI agent deployment. That means we could see massive automation saturation between 20. This isn't a distant future scenario we can leisurely plan for over decades. We're talking about fundamental economic transformation happening within the current decade. Think about how quickly smartphones transformed from luxury gadgets to essential tools that everyone carries. The iPhone launched in 2007, and by 2015, most adults in developed countries owned smartphones that completely changed how they work, shop, communicate, and access information. AI agents are following a similar trajectory, but their impact will be far more profound because they directly replace human cognitive work rather than just augmenting it. And unlike physical technologies that require manufacturing and distribution infrastructure, software agents can be deployed globally almost instantly once they prove effective at specific tasks. Economic disruption accelerates exponentially once it reaches critical mass, because interconnected systems amplify small changes throughout the entire economy. When automation eliminates 5% of jobs, the economy can absorb that displacement through normal job turnover and new industry growth. When automation eliminates 20% of jobs, it triggers cascading effects that destabilize entire sectors. Unemployed workers reduce their spending, which hurts businesses and leads to more layoffs. Tax revenues decline, while social service demands increase. Banks face higher default rates on loans. The feedback loops create acceleration that makes each subsequent wave of automation more disruptive than the previous one. Building new economic infrastructure takes significant time and political coordination that we can't accomplish during a crisis. You can't design and implement county-level ownership programs, retrain bank systems for portfolio management, or establish cooperative ownership models while unemployment is skyrocketing and social order is breaking down. These institutional changes require careful planning, pilot testing, political consensus building, and gradual rollout phases that work best during periods of economic stability. Crisis conditions create urgency but also create resistance to change, as people demand immediate solutions rather than long-term systematic reforms. Early adopters of ownership-based economic models will position themselves much better for the automation transition than communities that wait until traditional employment collapses. Counties that establish infrastructure funds and cooperative ownership programs today will have revenue streams and wealth distribution mechanisms in place when automation accelerates. Banks that develop expertise in managing diverse ownership portfolios will attract customers seeking alternatives to wage-based income. Individuals who build property ownership stakes now will have income security when their jobs become automated. The communities and institutions that act proactively will thrive while those that react defensively will struggle. Delaying action makes solutions more expensive and politically difficult because crisis conditions reduce available options and increase resistance to change. When unemployment is low and the economy is stable, communities can experiment with ownership models using existing resources and voluntary participation. When unemployment is high and social tensions are rising, any proposed changes face suspicion and opposition from people who fear losing what little economic security they have left. Crisis conditions also strain government budgets and limit the financial resources available for implementing new programs or infrastructure investments. Historical examples show clear patterns of how societies succeed or fail when adapting to technological change. Countries that embraced industrialization early, like Britain and Germany, became economic powerhouses while maintaining social stability through gradual adaptation. Countries that resisted industrial change or failed to manage the transition effectively experienced decades of economic stagnation and political instability. The difference often came down to timing and proactive policy responses rather than the underlying technological capabilities or natural resources. The Nordic countries provide a more recent example of successful adaptation to economic transformation. Norway and Alaska built sovereign wealth funds that distribute oil revenues to citizens, creating ownership-based income streams that supplement traditional employment. These programs succeeded because they were established during periods of economic growth rather than crisis, allowing for careful design and gradual implementation. The early timing gave these programs decades to mature and prove their effectiveness before facing major economic stress tests. This window of opportunity won't stay open indefinitely, because economic and political conditions will become less favorable for systemic change as automation accelerates. Right now, unemployment remains relatively low, giving communities time and resources to experiment with new economic models. Political institutions remain stable enough to support complex policy innovations. Financial markets continue functioning normally, providing capital for infrastructure investments and cooperative ownership programs. These favorable conditions create space for the gradual voluntary adoption of ownership-based economic systems. But that window is closing faster than most policymakers recognize. Each wave of automation eliminates more jobs and creates more economic stress. Political polarization increases as different groups compete for shrinking economic opportunities. Financial instability grows as traditional business models face disruption from AI systems. Social tensions rise as inequality increases between those who own automated systems and those who depend on disappearing jobs. These deteriorating conditions make comprehensive economic reform much more difficult to achieve through democratic processes. What makes this transformation the most important economic shift in human history is its scope and speed compared to previous changes. The agricultural revolution took thousands of years to spread globally. The Industrial Revolution unfolded over centuries. The Information Revolution happened over decades. The Automation Revolution is compressing similar economic transformation into years. We are essentially trying to redesign the fundamental basis of economic participation, while the old system continues operating and millions of people depend on it for survival. The challenge isn't just technological or economic. It's about preserving democratic institutions and social cohesion during a transition that could easily spiral into political chaos. If handled poorly, authoritarian movements thrive during periods of economic disruption, when people lose faith in existing institutions and democratic processes. The rise of extremist politics in recent years already reflects economic anxiety about automation and globalization. Massive unemployment could push democratic societies toward authoritarian solutions that promise stability through centralized control rather than distributed ownership and local democracy. You have the opportunity right now to engage with these ideas and push for ownership-based solutions in your own community before crisis conditions make change more difficult. This week, consider taking one concrete step. Explore local ownership pilots in your area. Contact county officials about infrastructure funds, or ask your bank about investment options that build property income. Support political candidates who understand the automation challenge and propose comprehensive economic reforms. Join or create cooperative ownership initiatives in your community. The actions you take today will determine whether your community thrives during the automation transition or struggles with unemployment and economic displacement. This isn't about predicting an inevitable future. It's about recognizing that we're creating systems with incredible productive potential while simultaneously undermining the very foundations that allow people to benefit from that progress. The solution requires rebuilding our economic foundation from the ground up. Here's the paradox we're facing. We're building incredible machines that can produce everything we need, but we're destroying the very system that lets people afford what those machines create. Remember that 60% of aggregate demand comes from wages, but automation eliminates those wages while expecting people to keep buying products. This isn't some unavoidable disaster heading our way. It's a design challenge that requires fresh thinking about ownership and how we share wealth. The question isn't whether automation will transform our economy. That's already happening. Will you secure property stakes before wages vanish? How will you participate in building the ownership-based economy that comes next? Subscribe for deeper dives on ownership models and the future of economic participation in our automated world.